Prepare yourself to be blown away by the seismic sounds and scrutiny of Aftershocks Podcast with Chris Aiken and Matt Hartnett.
Well, cool, man. Yeah, let's get started in here. All right, man. So Aftershocks episode number 11. And joining me on the podcast today is thrash veteran and vocalist of the mighty Warbringer, who have just released their new album titled Weapons of Tomorrow on Napalm Records, Mr. John Kevill. What's happening, John? How you doing, man?
Hey, I'm doing great. Just chilling out here in my hammock right now on the porch and doing interviews in coronavirus. My wife and I are under quarantine, so we've been cooking and gardening and, going on walks around the neighborhood. And that's been about it, honestly.
Sure.
I wish we could tour on this damn record.
Well, yeah, I mean, speaking of the record, I mean, everyone's raving about it. It's your sixth LP, and like you said, I mean, I know it's obviously very difficult to release a new record under these circumstances, but I mean, you definitely got to feel really good about the reaction thus far, and it can only mean good things when you do start touring again. I know you guys are road warriors, man. You're always on the road, so I mean, like you were just kind of explaining to me right before we started here. I mean, what else can a musician like yourself do at this time other than doing a shitload of interviews? What else can you really do to help promote your record?
I feel that way. Fortunately, I'm lucky that there's a shitload of people that want to do interviews. So that's really, such as yourself. So thank you,
Sure.
For the time and all that. And it's been a wonderful kind of opportunity to sort of think about how, the state of what we're trying to do artistically and what I get out of metal as an art form in the first place and all this kind of stuff that I think, I hope that I guess metal needs to answer in general. What's the use of this as an art form in 2020? And my answer is it's essential and vital stuff, and that's why I put my life into doing it. So just having all the interview questions thrown at me has gotten me to sort of personally reevaluate all that stuff and rethink my own thoughts on that.
Mm-hmm. Very cool. Yeah, no. And speaking of Weapons of Tomorrow, the new album, I mean, you guys definitely show no signs of the band slowing down. I mean, it's just another pummeling Warbringer listening experience. I mean, is it the band's goal each time you guys make a record? I mean, do you set out to outdo yourself? Because I mean, throughout the band's career, it seems like each release is more faster and furious than the previous one. Is that what you guys kind of aim to do?
Yeah, basically.
Yeah.
I think that's fundamentally a sort of metal frame of thought is wherever you were before, you got to push past it.
Mm-hmm.
You have to find some way to top yourself. And I hope to be able to continue doing that and pretty much, let's see how long we can do this Warbringer thing without putting out a shitty record.
Yeah.
And let's see if we, it's my life. So I only got one of those and I can't aim low. So I'm like, if I'm going to spend my life doing thrash metal, I want to put out one of the great, career strings of albums in metal history if I can.
Sure.
That's the goal. It's not up to me to say if we do, but that's what I hope to try to accomplish.
Yeah.
So that's very much our mentality. We don't want to allow anything to dip. We never want to be a band that goes through the motions. It's our life's work, and we really believe in this stuff as an art form. So we try to give exactly what we would want to see from a band we liked. In terms of the content of the music and the consistency in terms of quality, but also consistent evolution and walking that difficult tightrope between evolving and changing while also keeping all the core elements that are why people are there in the first place. We're
Sure.
a band called Warbringer with a big spiky logo. We can't put out a soft record. It's got to be extreme, or you didn't get what you fucking paid for. We're not going to sell you. We're never going to sell you short like that.
Surely, that's a good point. No, and speaking of that, one of the best songs that we really like off the new record is "The Black Hand Reaches Out." I mean, that music really reminds me of a lot of the traditional metal in the same vein, the traditional thrash metal in the same vein as maybe like a Megadeth, just to throw one band out there. It's just a pure, no-nonsense sort of thrash song at its core. Was this a song that you kind of had maybe in the vault for some time, and did you decide to give it a rip? And did you, and do you see the guy, you guys doing more of this kind of material in the future?
So this one, we kind of thought that this was sort of kind of like this album's answer to something we had on our last record, a track like Remain Violent. Now, the thing that they have in common is they're basically a little more accessible and catchy than a lot of the kind of like multi-part songs we'll do with like 8 different riffs in them or whatever. These ones are kind of more like structurally, these are more like rock songs.
Okay.
And we like that too, and part of what I think a lot of separates the metal I do like from that I don't is, does it fucking rock? So we're, that's where we stand. And yeah, we're trying to get these kind of things. We want to have something to use as a single that can be accessible. It can help draw you into some of the more extreme and labyrinth stuff we do. And also just a sweet live headbanger, a cool sing-along, all those. The mid-pace thrash song really scratches those itch numbers. We're looking at numbers like, maybe something like Peace Cells or People to Lie or Toxic Waltz, those kind of jams, that kind of speed and cadence.
So more of a kind of groovy kind of thing, just to switch it up a little bit, sort of.
Yeah, exactly. So, and different groups, because like even that, the next song, Crushed Beneath the Tracks, is more like a lurching early death metal groove, and and Black Hand is like a straight mid-pacer, we call those, mid-pace thrash number. And there's a lot of great ones of those in the canon. So yeah, and I'd say compared to the last album, because we did a similar type of song, so how do we make it different? Because that's the challenge that we get if we want to do something that scratches sort of a similar itch.
Sure.
And Remain Violent is kind of just like mostly around one riff, and it's just a brick. And the Black Hand, by contrast, I think is like the melodic style in the riff is a little sneakier, so to speak. It's less brick, and it's more like creeping up on you, infiltration, and that goes that helps me choose what the lyrics are gonna be, is kind of what vibe do I get from the riffs. Remain Violent, brick, so police, riot, violence, that kind of stuff. Black Hand, clandestine, assassination, plots, so I just I almost word cloud it in my own head when I hear a riff. What does this riff evoke to me? And that's going to dictate what I write in the lyric.
Oh, interesting. Very cool. And you guys also, you've worked with some great producers over the years. I mean, you've worked with a legendary, when you guys started out with Bill Matoyer, you've obviously worked with Gary Holt, Steve Evitz, who's another awesome producer. You did 2 albums with him. And now, of course, over the last 2 albums, you've worked with Mike Plotnikoff, who himself has worked with other, great metal bands like Fear Factory and In Flames. I mean, it really seems like Mike has done such a great job on these last 2 records, which to me are arguably maybe both of my favorite Warbringer releases. What is he?
Me too.
Yeah.
me too. Yeah,
awesome, man.
We got better.
Totally, man. I mean, you guys have it. I mean, so what does he add and bring to the table compared to like some of the producers you've worked with in the past that really makes it click on, especially on these last 2 releases?
So first I want to say I'm really thankful to have worked with all the guys we've worked with. It was a positive experience on every single record. I got nothing but love for any of those guys you named. They're great, and it's been each one of them is talented, has taught me different stuff at different stages of my career, and they're all different people who have their own mindset towards making records. Mike Plotnikoff has his own angle, which is different. He is one of the most like Zen-minded dudes. He has this attitude in the studio of, it will be a great record, you have to believe that it will be, and you go in there and you know that in your heart, and whatever comes out is what's supposed to be there, and that kind of mindset can be really helpful in kind of getting you to believe in yourself and what you're doing, and that can help the musicians. That atmosphere can really help the musicians deliver when they're in the recording booth behind the mic, which is a stressful scenario. And I've seen great players, I've worked with a bunch. I've seen great players have a real hard time in that setting when they can kill the exact same parts on a live stage,
Sure.
So Mike's really great in that way specifically, and he also kind of like me, because I don't play an instrument. I've studied a limited amount of music theory, so I'm not illiterate in it, but not in the same way as a guy who's been playing for 15 years or whatever. But Mike and I tend to describe music a lot in terms of pictures, and so we kind of speak the same language in that way regarding the songs, and we communicate well in that regard. I can say something kind of abstract about how I want the song to sound. Mike seems to get it, and he gets an idea, and it sparks him. So I really like his mindset in that way. He's just a really comfortable dude to work with. He's also very skilled, and his engineer Hatch, who's his right hand man and our sharpest ears in the world, deserves special mention as well. So it's the studio, the setup, and the people together that make it what it is. And we've really enjoyed recording the last 2 records there.
Yeah, awesome. No, and they're great records, man. And and of course, you guys, Warbringer were very synonymous with the thrash revival in the late 2000s. What's great is that most of those bands that came out of that continue to really, like yourself, with Warbringer, you guys really continue to gain more and more steam with, both old and new metal fans, and as Warbringer, has proven, like I said, over each record, when the band was first coming up, did you have sort of like, I guess maybe a chip on your shoulder to say, sort of to like prove that you weren't just a replica of the classic thrash bands? Because, when a music revival like that, for lack of a better term, occurs, you're automatically going to be bludgeoned to death with comparisons to your predecessors. I mean, whether it's the fans or the press or whoever. What was your experience like in those early days, Warbringer's rise, when you guys were, were you guys being compared to like any of the great thrash monsters? Did it put that chip on your shoulder, like we're not just, replica, we're our own thing?
Oh God! Everything you said,
yeah.
Yes. I'm not playing thrash metal because I want to pretend it's 1986 or something. That's the year I was born. I'm 33 now. But it's like I got no particular nostalgia for any certain era. I like music based around riffs and solos and real ideas, and I don't see that and singers with their own individual character, and I really got that out of a lot of 80s and 70s and into the early 90s, kind of the original run of the canon of all the main metal genres before the 90s happened, kind of throw the whole thing, the whole state of the art into turmoil, and we've got like kind of a revival that's been going on since the 2000s. That's sort of my view on it in terms of like straight metal as a musical form. So I'm trying to do it based on just a love for the art form and not based on any like retro desires. Just like that's the fucking metal I like. I like Maiden, Priest, Metallica, Bathory, fucking Slayer, Dark Angel, Demolition Hammer, old fucking metal shit. Death, whatever. So for someone to say you guys are retro in the first place, I thought was kind of stupid, because I'm just like, we're actually playing fucking metal.
Yeah, totally.
Screw you. And in 2008, I feel like that's a short list.
Very. Yeah.
It's a shorter list than it should be. And so that was and so I had a chip on my shoulder before anybody wrote an article about us. I was like, this shit's not fucking metal. Why is nobody doing the shit that's here on these records that are way better than the ones coming out today? That just pissed me off.
Sure.
And so you hear that anger all throughout Warbringer all the time. And I really think that it wasn't just early in our career that we were bombarded with endless comparisons. I think it took us 10 to 12 years to start to get out of that. It was so infuriating, man.
I could imagine.
Dude, because listen to the first 3 albums. There's really different shit on there.
Sure.
Even the first album, which I think I think our first album is derivative from 80s thrash. I'll say that straight up. I was 19 when we wrote those. It was my first musical endeavor in my life, I don't know. Sorry, I don't at that time have an answer for what can you do new in a 30-year-old job. I'm not a fucking genius like that where I just step in and got all the answers on my first record. I'm not that guy. It would be great if I was. It's been a learning curve.
Sure.
But I think first record, At the Crack of Doom, people are asking me now, this black metal stuff on Defiance of Fate or Heart of Darkness, it's so new for you guys. I'm like, no, it's not. Have you fucking listened to us? We've been doing that since day one.
Yes, day one. Totally.
It's just a matter of degree. We've always been more extreme than most new thrash bands you could name. We go further instrumentally, not just vocally, instrumentally into black and death metal. We've done that since day one. And Waking in Nightmares has a shitload of death metal on it. Listen to the drums. Worlds Torn Asunder has like some crushing doom death stuff on Demonic Ecstasy at the end. There's all kinds of different shit on our records, and you read a review of our record, even by like the third one. There was a review that got put on Metal Sucks where the guy basically wrote the following. He's like, Re-thrash was cool a few years ago, but I'm over it now, and this is a re-thrash record, so I don't like it.
Yeah.
I'm like,
jeez.
we wrote these songs. This took us a fucking year to make.
Yeah.
You know, we tour, we sweat, we bleed for this shit, and that's the shake you're gonna give us. Fuck you.
Yeah.
What gives you the right, you know, to whoever, and not just that one journalist who wrote that thing, but to any of them. It's like, do you have any idea what you're even saying? I heard shit like, you know, if you're going to compare us to 80s thrash, I know my 80s thrash reasonably well. And, like, you better at least make the right comparisons. You know, I like Anthrax, but I do not sound like Joey Belladonna from Anthrax. I know what I sound like, and I know what he sounds like. It's not close. And I get those kind of comparisons just because he's another guy, and yes, that's a thrash metal band. It's like, fuck, dude. It was the laziness with which we were written off was really galling. And there's a record where we really basically we fucking like freaked out our fan base, I think, with Empire's Collapse, because what that record was is John Locks especially was even more mad about this stuff than I was, because he didn't view himself as strictly a metal player. He was like, I'm an artist, you know, I want to do art, basically, and nobody will give me any credit for anything I write, no matter what I actually write. That's what we felt like by around the third album, because Waking Into Nightmares doesn't sound like any record from the 80s. I know my 80s thrash classics. None of them sound like that. No. Yeah. The Waking Into Nightmares couldn't have existed before around 2009. The influences that made it wouldn't have been there yet. You know, the style of drumming is So I think that what's kind of cool now is, since Woe to the Vanquished, we're getting this sort of retrospective look at our career. It's not just, hey, Warbringer are good now. Warbringer have always been doing this. They've always been on this exact same path. We haven't deviated. Empire's Collapse is like a weird experiment where we're basically like, okay, the experimentation with extreme stuff, progressive stuff, melodic stuff that we've always done, we're going to dial that up like 3 notches, and we're going to make the art look totally different and not like an old thrash record and all that, because we were so sick of being written off that we did a whole record wildly different, just so that if anyone was like, yeah, it's just like Slayer again, then it's like, you're an idiot. You haven't fucking listened to this for like even 5 minutes.
Yeah.
You know?
Like you said, it's pure laziness. It's the laziness of you know, the journalists for that. Just to throw that comparison out, you know, there's not much thought put into it. It's easy, like you said, to say, oh, it sounds like Anthrax, and to write it off. You know what I mean? So yeah, I agree with that. I think it's total nonsense.
It's like if you're gonna compare me to old thrash people, the ones you should be talking about is like Extreme Aggression, Coma of Souls Creator, Epidemic of Violence, Tortured Existence, Demo Hammer. You should be mentioning the second and third Sacrifice records. You know, if you should mention Spectrum of Death for some of the vocal isms that are on there. You know, and then I think you should mention some of the Bay Area stuff, but not others, because we have our favorites. You know,
sure,
we know what's in our stew pretty well. We know what we listen to, and it's funny to see people kind of make what looks like stabs in the dark trying to guess what it was, and mostly be wrong, you know, or I'll hear we're like Slayer. What about all the melodic solos that we have on all of our records? Is that like Slayer? No. You know, So a lot of these people write this stuff. It's like, do you actually listen to this stuff? Or is it just all the same to you because it has that word thrash attached to it? I keep telling everybody, thrash metal is actually a pretty wide genre. It's the only metal genre that sort of like touches all the others. It shares a border because it emerges from like heavy and speed metal. It also shares roots with punk rock and hardcore, and then it's kind of the ground floor of black and death metal that come out of it. So on one end of its evolution, it's got these earlier forms, and it leads to these later forms. And so it's right in the middle of all the major forms of heavy metal.
That's a great point.
Therefore, thrash can go and touch all of them. You can be raw and primitive and like punked out as fuck in a thrash band, or you could be techie and prog as fuck, and it's the same genre. You know?
Yeah, that's a great point.
Kill 'em All and Injustice for All are the same band.
Yeah. No, I know what you're saying. Yeah, totally.
And that's not even we're not even getting into the fucking Coroner or Blind Illusion or any of that.
Sure.
You know?
Yeah. No, that's a great point. Yeah, about thrash touching on every other sort of subgenre. That's a great point. Yeah.
So I think the twist we have that's a little different from all the fascinating permutations you see past and present is that we had this thought: what if 80s classic thrash records, pretty much the whole canon and the range of them, kind of went into some of the like mid 90s forms that black and death metal were taking, some of the melodic death metal stuff on that end, as well as some of the more brutal stuff. And then for black metal, some of the atmospheric and melodic stuff, and specifically, why did like And Justice for All and Twilight of the Gods never have a baby, like Bathory, Twilight of the Gods, that fucking glorious record. Yeah, why did that vibe never reach on a thrash album? And on something like Defiance of Fate, it's like we were basically thinking to ourselves, what if you had a Fade to Black, Cemetery Gates, one of those kind of ballady but heavy songs, halfway, sort of those half and half numbers that are pretty cool and unique.
Sure.
What if instead of going into more like classic metal riffs at the end, if it went all fucking epic, Bathory mode at the end, basically, as the release to the build-up? And that's kind of the song you hear, and the lyric was written to match all that. And so I think that what we're able to do from our perch that we're on in the 21st century is, if we kind of critically pick apart the entire canon of everything we like, we can repurpose and repiece it together in different ways that weren't ever done. And that way our inspirations are still all within the straight up like metal with a capital M canon, not post nothing here, and we're still no post metal here. It's just metal, and it's great. Dude, there's stuff in post metal I enjoy, but it's like it's not the same. It's not the same building to me. It's not the same. It's not the same thing. It doesn't make you go like That's totally, what you're not going to air guitar like some of that like really atmospheric stuff that's out there. It has its place. It's wonderful, but I want that, and I want to make that, and I think it sucks that there isn't, since like 1990, 92 there hasn't been a universally regarded classic release in the field of straight up metal.
True.
You could argue you could argue maybe Slaughter of the Soul or something's like the closest anybody's come, because that was influential on a whole genre. But even then, not quite to the same extent. People don't usually talk about a record like that, well regarded though it is, in the same kind of tones they're talking about like a Rust in Peace or something,
Yeah. No,
so,
totally,
and these are good records I'm comparing. We're only talking about the sweetest fucking, the high thrones of shred, the arts of the riff. That's all we even care about, here in what we're analyzing to make Warbringer records.
Sure. Yeah. No, nice. Yeah. So as someone who pays, great attention to detail, to society and just human behavior in general, in your opinion, what's going on now, this pandemic? Is this a weapon of tomorrow that you write about, sort of like you kind of write about on the new album? Is this something you think might be?
So the voice that you hear of me in Warbringer is one aspect of myself, and it's me at my most paranoid, negative, and cynical. So first, know that I'm not always in that mode of thought in my regular life, but that's the mode of thought that I think fits the kind of music we're making and the art form in general. That's what it's about, is the darkness in the world.
Sure.
So I think basically my point here is I'm the guy that if you throw a conspiracy theory at me, if you throw a conspiracy theory at me, I'm gonna tear it apart. I'm that guy.
Okay.
I think that a lot of people don't necessarily understand all the interests and geostrategic motives behind actions of things like government and entrenched power. And so because of that, it seems like a shadowy conspiracy, because like clearly these actions aren't in the interest of the people they're ruling over. So I think you get a lot of that kind of thought out of that. And I sort of don't believe any of that. What I do think is that, basically are people in the world economy specifically going to opportunistically jump on this and try to make what they can out of it to serve their own interests, and yes, at the cost of the interests of others? Yes, that's basically what happens anytime anything happens in history. I can tell you that much.
Sure.
So also, the virus probably did come from a lab, but that doesn't mean that they were trying to make a bioweapon. What do you think medical research comes from? Every government in the world is running labs where they're testing viruses. The thing is, the Chinese Communist Party is a bad faith actor on the world stage. It's a totalitarian state still, even though it's a critical part of the world economy. And we've kind of made that deal, as the free world, the West, whatever you want to call it, which has its own problems.
Oh yeah.
So I think that the thing is that all the wet market stuff and the way that the Chinese government, clearly their death figures, which are much lower than the United States in the official numbers, just if you think about, well, the virus originates there and the population's this and all that, that can't be true. They're lying, and you know it. So that doesn't mean the whole thing was an evil conspiracy, but it does mean that it's being handled in sort of a very shady manner. That's what I think about that. I don't think it was like deliberately engineered as a weapon, but I think people are going to use the circumstances to profit how they can, and that a lot of that won't necessarily be good for people.
Sure. Gotcha. Okay, cool, man.
And I can't really speak in more specific terms than that without talking out of my ass.
Gotcha.
Yeah. So I'll tell you, that's the best assessment that seems to me to be logical and fair that I can really give from where I'm sitting at a random house in Los Angeles.
Yeah. No, very cool. Yeah. No, thanks, man. And just one last thing. Like I said, just obviously, how you're talking now, and just I know you're very well schooled, obviously, in world history. Yeah, you've got a very professorial way of speaking. Is teaching in your retirement plans if you ever do leave the music world? Is that something you could do, or what you want to do?
People seem to think I'm a history professor already. If you put me next to a real historian, then all that nice stuff you just said about me isn't actually true. So it's relative to who and what your degree of interest is.
True.
And one, and if you look at your Socrates, the root of actually knowing anything is to know how little you know. So
yep.
I try to keep that in my head and try to keep oneself grounded in what I actually do know and what I actually don't, and try to be honest about it, because that's really important. But sure. Yes, I do want to teach. The stuff I study a lot and know pretty well is like world geopolitics and power and war stuff between about the French Revolution and the end of World War II. That's the period I know the best. I've been stuck on learning World War II in China, which starts earlier in the 30s. Mao Zedong, Chiang Kai-shek, all these guys. That's a tangled web right there. I'm trying to pick that one apart. But basically, I just think this is interesting stuff. And I think that if you're trying to see what happens next in world history, and you put it all in context, there's some things that are pretty apparent. One, we're in really uncharted territory. And the only thing you can look in terms of the technology, the population, the industry, the size and power of the global economy, and I guess the advancement of society, all that is off the charts compared to anywhere it's been in history before. Sure. So the only thing I can tell you is that all those statements I just told you, that has all been true before too. If you look at, say, like, I'm really fascinated by the pre-World War I era, because that's a period where, kind of like today, they had a stable world order for a while, where it was the imperial powers kind of having this détente between them, this agreement. They're going to carve up the world in such a way as the root of a lot of the problems we got now. But I find that really interesting. And they're also dealing with, they're in late-stage industrial revolution there. They're cooking up, like, massive steel battleships and machine guns and like swarms of modern artillery and all that. So the weapons race is on. They're implementing electric lighting in cities and like cars and all this stuff, and the airplanes being invented. So they're literally crossing into new frontiers. Humans can go in the sky now and stuff. And then the world order kind of explodes, and they get 4 years in the trenches and millions dead, and then another even worse one that ends with people being, exterminated in camps and nuked and bombed from, cities obliterated from the skies. And that's 70, 80, that's 70 to like 120 years ago range. Sure. So I look at that, and now again, post 1945, the great powers kind of had this agreement between them, long period of peace. When's the next great power conflict? Because if you're just looking at it in cycles from those terms, well, by our kids' lifetime, we're probably looking at one, and that's scary. You can see, scary, the U.S. power, which kind of probably peaked around heck, when I was a kid around like George H.W. Bush, Bill Clinton, America in the 90s, which we can see right now, America, all the stuff about the current political discourse. How do we, the guy who's in office right now won on Make America Great Again. That tells you something. That tells you that people in America don't think we're doing as well as we were.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because we aren't.
Mm-hmm.
There's some factual shit behind that.
Sure.
So that decline in American, both the kind of faith in the system that your average American's going to have, because more and more are kind of left behind, living in their cars as Uber drivers, that kind of shit that more and more people are doing nowadays, is pretty much it's kind of reminiscent of some of the social currents and problems that existed in the lower class kind of in the pre-World Wars era. So I find a real it's not a repetition. The whole history repeats thing is a real cliche, but it rhymes. I use that. It rhymes like words in a song, where some of the themes are similar. And because you can't look into the future, I can't tell you when coronavirus will end or what its long-term impact will be, for instance, or how it'll change globalization, all that shit people are wondering. I can't tell you any of that, but what I can tell you is that you can't count out dramatic change happening. Just because you have known a world that's basically pretty stable does not mean you will continue to.
Absolutely.
Those people in those times before, they were in our shoes where they're thinking, well, pretty much the existing system will continue, and then they were proven dramatically wrong in horrifying ways. And that's kind of Warbringer as an artistic statement. It's like, hey, reminder, you people, you're so worried about the next iPhone and what features it'll have and can you afford it and all that. And so, now people are, I think, in coronavirus a little more practical with their can I afford it concerns. But
sure.
They're living
the first world problem stuff. Living
that material life, and it's like there's bigger shit than that you got to be aware of. And if you check out of news and politics because hey, everyone's lying to you because they all have an interest, which they do. That benefits exactly the continuation of the kind of stuff that's putting us in this bad spot that we're in right now. So I think that as an art form, my answer to what's the point of aggressive, angry, screaming heavy metal like I make, it's to kind of just cast a light on that dark, the unsettling stuff. Just ask people the question, what's next? Hey, my last record, Silhouettes, it's like, hey, remember Nukes? Remember all those Cold War era thrash records that had those? Those didn't go anywhere. They didn't get rid of all of those or anything.
Yeah, no, you're right. Yeah, true. Yeah.
A lot of the stuff that you think is a concern of the past actually isn't. That people just aren't talking about it, and that itself is kind of scary.
Yes, I agree with you, man. Absolutely, 100%. Well, yeah, man. Hey, I'm getting ready to wrap it up here. It's been a pleasure, man. Any other comments you want to say before we close it out?
Well, just thanks for having me on your show. It's been wonderful. Thanks for letting me rant and rave about the stuff on my mind.
Sure, man. Anytime.
Yeah, it's funny though, because one of the great things about metal, you can have sort of a guy. It feels like they might be the crazy guy over in the corner. You can get a platform to write it into song, and that's often, I think, a more effective way to communicate. Not even so much the ideas, but the feelings behind them. The feeling of anger, just dissatisfaction. I think every person alive today is somewhat dissatisfied with how the world's been handling the current crisis, and that it tells us, and a lot of people have a lot of different ideas on this, it tells us that we got to change some shit. We got to do better.
Yeah, I agree.
And I think art's a useful way to kind of bring that, not even the message like we're preaching, but just that feeling, to just connect to that feeling, because I feel it all the fucking time when I see all this shit in the world that just makes me go, really?
Yeah, I know, Yeah, totally, dude. I agree with you 100%, man. Absolutely. Well, hey, man. Well, yeah, thanks. Really appreciate you coming on, man. And traditionally, on the podcast here, we like to end it with a song from a new release that's coming up. So what song would you like to end things here with off of Weapons of Tomorrow?
Off Weapons of Tomorrow. Shit. Well, you like Black Candle. Let's do
something a little different, yeah. Yeah,
let's do a little different one. Well, heck, okay. Track 3, Crushed Beneath the Tracks, is about, so it's not about a tank. It's about this metaphor of these kind of eternally grinding and rolling tracks as sort of it's a metaphor for progress. Nobody asked for automation. job loss from automation. Nobody asked for, the way all business is done now. Nobody asked for this kind of world. It just happened. And or nobody asked for your phone to spy on them either. This kind of stuff. But it just happened. And that's part of the story. And you got to deal with it, adapt or die. And that's what this song's about. You don't get a choice in where progress goes. It's this merciless engine, and we're all stuck to it. That's what this song's about.
That's a great, lyrical themes. I like that. That's pretty awesome, man. So cool. Yeah, we'll go ahead and we'll put that on there. Crush Beneath the Tracks. This is off the new release by Warbringer, out now on Napalm Records. And as always, thanks for listening to Aftershocks. And once again, thanks a lot, John, for coming on.
Thank you. It's been great.
Appreciate it. Take care, buddy. Take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
Thanks for listening to Aftershocks. For more episodes, go to our website at www.aftershockspodcast.com. Visit us on our Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter pages for more news and information on the podcast. And be sure to subscribe, listen to, and review all episodes on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and all other podcast platforms. For your music listening pleasure, visit our website or go to www.shockwavesradio.com. For all comments and questions, please email us at info@aftershockspodcast.com.